Greetings, welcome, greetings, peace and love, joy and prosperity. Come on in. Welcome to yet another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes, live here in youtube.com/Voodoo Tide, and also live by way of blogtalkradio.com/. And call-in number is area code 845. I'm still trying on call-in number for Blog Talk Radio, 845-277-9143. 845-277-9143. We already have callers in the queue. Indeed, when you are ready with your question, comment, or request, do press the number 1 on your telephone keypad, and I'll be more than happy to bring you into the conversation. Welcome, welcome, welcome to another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Greetings to those who are already present with me in the live chat by way of the YouTube live platform. Thank you so much, Kiona, for being present to help and assist me today in the live chat. Please, listeners, to settle in. We'll be forward momentarily. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Welcome, welcome, come on in. We have a very special show. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, peace and love, joy and prosperity. Come on in, come on in. Please, come on Greetings, come on in, settle in. Blog Talk Radio, welcome. YouTube Live, welcome. Peace and love, greetings, greetings, New Jersey, greetings, greetings. For my YouTube Live audience, the live listening and call-in number is area code 845-277-9143. 845-277-9143 with your live questions and comments. Otherwise, you can type your questions and comments in all capital letters. Kiona will assist me in making sure that I don't miss anyone's questions in the live YouTube chat. Otherwise, you can use the Blog Talk Radio number at 845-277-9143. Greetings, greetings, Alafia, greetings, welcome, divine, all blessed, peace and love, joy and prosperity, elevation, revelations, and manifestation. You are now sitting live with the Divine Prince, and always in archive at your leisure and convenience by way of blogtalkradio.com/the-divine-prince, and also by way of YouTube Live at youtube.com/Voodoo Tide, VOODOOTYE. You are listening live and always in archive with the Elagun Oloye Hoodoo Obeya Bokur, sharing with you in all spiritual, mystical, metaphysical, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from a Pan-African Hoodoo world spiritualist perspective, understanding that all is truly and indeed a blessing if you can just see beyond the veils, for it is all just an illusion and a test and one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. This is my constant prayer, my mantra, affirmation, reverberation, reiteration, and it is my ever-living reality. It is crucial to the very foundation of my understanding, my teaching, my walk, my works along this divine, all blessed life path and journey. And it is how I, the Divine Prince, make sense out of all that we're challenged with here in our daily existence on Mother, Father, Earth. And it is my personal place of power and understanding, the place from where I begin, the place from where I realize and crystallize all my endeavors, understanding that I alone create and co-create my divine destiny, and I alone create and co-create my divine, all blessed reality. And so it is. Ashe, Asheo, Ashe. I welcome you this Friday, December 13th, 2019. And I am emanating and vibrating with you and for you live, but also in archive at your leisure and convenience on two platforms, Blog Talk Radio. You can call me now at 845-277-9143. I'll be going to the phone line early. And you can also enter your questions, comments, and requests in the live YouTube audience in the chat box by typing your questions in all capital letters, and I'll be more than happy to assist and respond to you. We are still in a full moon cycle as so entering this highly prized holiday season. And I've said on many shows that the veils are the thinnest between now and Mardi Gras Day, between now and the last week of February. Mardi Gras falls on the last Tuesday in February 2020. So guard your spirit, guard your hearts, guard your mind, keep your third eyes open, keep your hands open, and allow the ancestors on whose shoulders we all have our being and our standing to carry you forward into another year of great fortune, great prosperity, great happiness, great healing, great growth and evolution. I also want to take this moment before I go to my phone lines to invite you to be a part of my annual New Year's Eve Soul Festival, which is held here in historic Tremaine around 9 p.m. New Year's Eve. Gives you a chance to get settled in, get parked, get into the ceremony, and we typically go well past midnight in bringing in the new year. There'll be prosperity rituals. There'll be healing rituals. There'll be healing and beneficial ceremony that will allow us to move again into 2020 empowered, clear, open, vibrating at the right octaves, but also ready to receive that which the ancestors and spirit would have for us to possess as we continue to move forward. I am going to go to the phone lines. I'm going to call out your area code first. I'm going to the phone lines first. I apologize for all the debacle of technology that we may have experienced on yesterday. I still don't know to what degree I was actually heard in Blog Talk Radio on yesterday. So I appreciate my first caller, area code 203, for calling in and also giving me an opportunity to make sure that the system is functioning and operating up to par today. So area 203, who's calling and where are you calling from?
Hi, my name's Pat. I'm calling from Connecticut. I'm a first-time caller.
Yes, greetings and salutations. How can we assist you today?
Thank you. Well, I don't know. I hope my question's appropriate since I'm new. You caught my eye on Blog Talk Radio. I've moved to an apartment building, and I'm dealing with some negative people. One, I thought befriended me. Now, is my question, it seem like it's going to be appropriate?
I typically don't do personal readings and consultations on the air. I'm willing to address general questions, of course.
Well, I was going to ask, how does one, without getting heavily concerned about the other person, how does one protect oneself from the negative energy that's going to you all the time? And it's unfounded.
That's actually a great question. I would say that many people in our listening range right now can relate to that. I personally can.
The connection's really bad.
Can you hear me?
Breaking up. Keep trying though.
Okay, I will. And thank you for letting me know about the technology, because we have been having some issues with technology. That's a question that many people in the audience can relate to, and I'm sure would want to hear a response to. And of course, the answer can be as specific to environment, but there can also be very general things that you can do overall that can protect you, defend you in a mobile sort of way, meaning environment won't necessarily be as relevant. We have been talking in most recent shows about crystals, minerals, stones, and indeed there are stones that you can work with that can create active force fields of energy around you to protect you from wayward, if not consciously directed energy. A very common mineral would be hematite. And hematite is a very popular and also cheap mineral to some degree. But unfortunately, it's being bastardized in a lot of these rock shops and jewelry shops. So be sure that what you are actually purchasing is hematite. I tend to stay away from pre-made jewelry. Often I will buy my coral, or I will buy my beads, or I will buy my pearls, or I will buy my gemstones loose to first ensure that they are authentic, and then mount them, string them, rope them together in jewelry. So I don't suggest that you buy hematite jewelry right off unless you are sure that it's absolutely hematite. Typically, if it's polished, if it's carved, if it's shaped, if it's cut, you need to question the authenticity of the mineral. There's another base mineral that's commonly used to create what's called magnetic hematite, which is not hematite at all. It's just made to look like hematite, and then it's charged with this electric current that runs through it. So that's an example of something that's not hematite at all. Now, my viewers can see that I've held up a real polished hematite stone on camera. So caller, you might want to go back later and look on YouTube at the video. Hematite is a red stone. It appears metallic. It appears mirrored and shiny when it's polished. But if you were to drag this across a sidewalk or across a porcelain plate, it's going to leave a red residue, not gray, not metallic. It's a copper ore, it's an iron ore, hematite. It also has a natural energetic charge within it that integrates well in our electrical fields, in our electrical bodies. And so this is a stone, a base stone that you can carry, have in your purse, have in your bra, have in your pocket, have in your pouch, even crochet or knit a pouch and have it charged to amplify your protective frequencies, which will create a force field around you, making it harder for this negative energy to sort of penetrate and affect you directly. As in any case, when you're using darker colored stones and stones that don't technically qualify as a crystal, you want to make sure you're using quartz, clear quartz, in order to charge your frequency, keep your chakra systems, if you understand what chakra systems are, keep them open, keep those wheels spinning appropriately, and this will enhance the work that your hematite does. Now, if you are creative, if you can afford it, and you're having, let's say, a talisman, for instance, something you wear around your neck that might be set in gold or silver quartz, and you want to have hematite, real hematite included in that, that would also amplify that protective force field that first of all, we all naturally have, but it is weakened by many things that I mentioned on the previous show: diet, amount of water and fluids we're taking in, amount of energy, positive and negative, that we might be under. There's all sorts of stress, for instance. Some stresses, like stress that creative people might be under, that performers might be under, may show up as a positive stress. But then there are other stresses that we are under, other challenges that we are under, that can also weaken that energetic field. Also, of course, generational curses, unhealed issues, all of these things can erode and create pits and holes within your energy field, which allow wayward and consciously directed energy at you to actively reach its target in a way that it might not otherwise. A common belief in and around hoodoo is that if you don't believe in it, that it does not affect you. And the reality is that energy is real, energy is tangible, and energy is eternal. So it doesn't matter if you can see it, it doesn't matter if you readily perceive it, it doesn't matter if you believe it. That energy is still present, and we all must do and acquire the means and the skills by which that we can protect ourselves from this wayward energy. Now, you mentioned also that it may have a location specific condition. Uh, and I think you talked about your apartment building, I believe it is, in where you live. And of course, keeping your house clean. And I know that sounds a little bit generic, but if you understand even to some degree what feng shui is and how feng shui works and how energy patterns or pathways set up just like they do in our body through our chakra system, move through our workspace or our living space, or any given space that we spend a great deal of time in. And so negative energy can then be set up in those physical environments. So I suggest cleansing everything with ammonia. Going through with soapy ammonia water. You can add Florida water to it. You can add a little sweetening element to it. So that might be honey, that might be cinnamon powder, depending on other things that you might be trying to do beyond just protection and defense. You could break up your cinnamon or buy, not cinnamon, sage, and buy your sage in a powder or in a larger amounts, and then break that up into the water and also use that to completely cleanse your living space to the best of your ability. And if you're in a housing complex, in an apartment building, to the best that you can, wipe down your doorknobs, clean up in front of your doorway, and then sage your environment. Sage it, smudge it, burn a little frankincense and myrrh resin, a little sage directly on your charcoal burner. Sage it out a little bit. That takes a little bit of skill when you're in an apartment complex, particularly one of these modern complex full of smoke detectors. So you have to sort of burn a little and temper it, burn a little bit and temper it, so that you don't set off, your smoke alarms throughout the building.
Exactly.
And do it, maybe once a month, and sort of smudge out your space. And then you can also place mirrors. And this is a little bit of hoodoo, mirrors that face outward. So if you're inside your apartment, a mirror in a closet or in a corner facing out towards the hallway, so you wouldn't actually see the mirrored surface. It would be up against the wall to some degree. But that would also prevent outside energy from being able to directly affect you, and would also add a little element of send back to the people who may also be projecting this energy at you. Now, I would strongly suggest, caller, that you email me, DivinePrince at houseofthedivineprince.com. I really need to know some of the private, personal details about what's going on, and I really don't want you to talk about that in this forum, so that we can sort of personalize some of the defenses that might be required for you. I need to know some symptoms. I need to know, to some degree, what has been occurring there. There may be organized systems that are also being directed at you that I may not readily be able to perceive in just a general phone call such as this.
Interesting. Yeah, you hit on one thing. I get irritated and taken aback when this particular person is still involved, occupied in her mind by me. And I feel like I want to send back something, but that made me nervous. Is that too negative? So I appreciate you talking about acknowledging the fact that you can send back.
Listen, let me respond to that. You didn't actually ask a question, but you brought up a point that I think the listeners need to hear. And particularly when we're talking about curses, which is not exactly what we're talking about, but any idea of send back, multiplying, tripling forces. And we can look at many indigenous cultures and traditions, including the Bible to some degree, and see passages that talk about things being multiplied, things being doubled, for both light and darkness. And there has to be a degree of innocence, a degree of having your hands be clean, if you will, in terms of the sin back.
Yeah.
So that's important. And of course, if there are details about that, we don't want to go into that right now, not live on air. The second thing is that there are absolutely processes that can be applied that don't require you invoking your own darkness, that don't require you invoking your own negative energy, if you will. When we fall in ego, when we invoke our own darkness, we're then moving across that line into the realm of witchcraft. And there can be negative repercussions there. There's a way to absolutely be a light worker, a spirit worker, to be operating in clean hands, and to have negative things done to you, done towards you, projected at you, and to have that sent back, to have that multiplied in a way that does not leave a toxic residue on you. So I look forward to receiving your email so that we can better adjust how we approach that.
I'm gonna double check before I hang up because I don't see it on the page. It's DivinePrince at houseofdivineprince.org.
Houseofthedivineprince.com.
Okay, House of the Divine. Okay, the.com. Thank you so very much.
Houseofthedivineprince.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your call. Peace and blessings.
Okay.
I want to address a chat how the CMOS came into this. If it had something to do with the protective defensive thing, or if we're talking about something else altogether. There are healthy foods in the ocean. Now that we can talk about and address, and not just sea moss, if you will, but seaweeds. And seaweed is a very common product in Asia, particularly places like Japan. When we look at sushi, for instance, we're seeing seaweed being used, in some cases, sea moss being used. Now, sea moss can be toxic if you don't clearly understand what it is that you're ingesting. So if you're talking about ingesting a product, I would absolutely advise that you buy it um, at the store, and preferably at the Asian markets, the Chinese markets, the Japanese markets, where indeed they're much more accustomed to the operation around foods that might have a toxic element to it, so that you are sure that you're not getting a product that's toxic or that's going to affect you in a negative way. There are mosses that are toxic if ingested, but can still be used in other forms of ritual magic potions, lotions, and the like, without creating negative reactions or any kind of biological, physical reactions or responses to it. But that's absolutely a great question. Black salt is another protective product that has been used a great deal, and that sort of leans into some of the other things that I wanted to talk about today, as it relates to hoodoo, conjure, root work, and the presence of the botanicas. And many of my long-term listeners have heard me just talk about this before. We've discussed this before. We've shared information before about the overall effects of the marketplace, the botanicas, the Western store, the Western marketplaces, as it relates to how we operate in hoodoo, conjure, root work. I think it's also important not to neglect that voodoo, as I say in almost every show, made its way to the West by way of the Middle Passage. And so it first was a way of our remembering our deities, our powers, our gods, our forces, our rituals, our practices, but then became an act of revolution, then became an act of war, an act of defensive war, and in some cases offensive war, as a response to white supremacy, oppression, enslavement, and all the things that go along with that. I often, and no pun intended, sort of poke the bear as it relates to the Orisha romance. And it's probably not entirely fair to single out just those who are infatuated with Orisha. People are to much of an equal degree infatuated with Haitian Loa. However, the Haitian voodoo system is far too complex and complicated for many people to navigate it, to appropriate it to the same degree in which Orisha has been appropriated. I find it interesting as I continue to do my research for myself as well as for my students. There's a great deal of information that I don't post, that's not in my blog post, that doesn't make it to air to my shows, but some of my godchildren, like Paul Cologne and many others, could tell you just shows up randomly in their email or in their instant message communications about some of the things that I'm looking at and exploring. And it is also inclusive of some of the powers and the deities that aren't quite appropriated, either because there's a general lack of information about them and how to access them. And also, there's that language barrier that I've often talked about in previous shows. Languages and dialects that are spoken in Benin and Togo, among some of the ethnic indigenous peoples of Ghana and Nigeria, that can't be run through Google Translate, that aren't easy to learn and easy to find English translatable books that help us to better understand what those languages are talking about, are speaking. Even Ewe, to a great degree, is not a language that's widely dispersed in the diaspora, in a format in which people who aren't familiar with those people and the language can navigate in. So the requirement for and the necessity for elders and leadership who can navigate in these cultures, these languages, and these traditions, yet and still cannot be said enough, cannot be overstated. But there are powers that show up in what is commonly referred to today in modern times as juju. So we say Orisha in Nigeria. We say Akan in Ghana, and we're talking about ethnic groups. We say Eve. We say Fan. We're talking about ethnic groups. But when we talk about Juju, much like we talk about Hoodoo, you're talking about what the West coins as folk culture, folk practice among the families, the lineages specific to geographic locations, typically indigenous locations, as they show up around the world. And even the world indigenous continues to move around and evolve, because indeed is indigenous the original people, and who then are the original people as we begin to look at, for instance, 23andMe, who is now stacking your DNA results up using a linear timeline to show and express where your bloodline, where your lineage, your DNA footprint was at any specific given time in history, following a linear time frame. So the word indigenous is often overgeneralized, overused, and it's not as specific as going into looking specifically at ethnic groups and ethnic practices and ethnic traditions. And Juju is something that transcends Hausa, that transcends Yoruba, that transcends um, Igbo, that transcends the various families, which might be another way of looking at ethnic groups and how ethnic groups grow and divide, and how those family trees are literally created. They're created through our mothers and our fathers, and coming together through marriage and childbirth. So Juju is one of the first things that, in my opinion, and through my study, was demonized, if not stamped out, as a footprint in the West. So many of the deities, the forces, the powers that a modern Nigerian would associate with Juju, the average Westerner, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, has no knowledge of at all, or has a very limited range of knowledge in the most recent years, you may remember I talk about Aylala, Ayelala, in association with sex trafficking. And often these stories, with all their truth and facts embedded in them, are also presented and marketed to the West because they're salacious. Stories that involve animal sacrifice are salacious to the West. Stories that involve slavery in a 2018, 1920 context are salacious to the Western mindset. Not that they aren't important, not that they absolutely don't require our attention, if not our activity and our involvement, but are stories that stand out to the Western market, to the Western palate, in terms of how we view our media and our television programming and our movie programming, and the element to that which is entertainment, the element to that which is salacious. Sex is salacious, which is really the root of what salacious means, but violence is also salacious now. Weird is also salacious now. Things that are viewed as counterculture or counter religion, and particularly counter to Islam, Judaism, Christianity are seen as salacious, powerful, virus-invoking stories that show up in the news media, and of course today in your social media. So I'll be back to you in a moment, Keone. Give me a second. So we heard many heard for the very first time about Ayi Lala because of the slave trafficking. And it was said that this goddess, this power, was used to create fear and a sense of loyalty and obligation to many West Africans who are well versed in Ayala, who know what the power is, who've heard the stories. And I compared that to being born and raised in the American South, and hearing stories of hoodoo, of conjure, of root work, of voodoo in many of our families, particularly those of us born in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 30s. There's people in the 30s and the 20s still living. I didn't mean to neglect any particular age group, but we remember those stories. One of the first stories I can remember as a child, as a toddler, was around voodoo, was around hoodoo, was around conjure from both sides of my family, both my mother's side and my father's side of the family. And they sound and they feel like and they resonate very similarly to these myths and legends and stories and tales as they are passed through the Western, through the um, Northwestern African family, the telling and retelling of the power of our mighty ancestors. I.e., Lala, and I'm sure if I'm incorrect, someone in Cameroon, Nigeria, Benin, who's listening to me right now, will help me to get my information right. But it's a primordial power, and many of the primordial powers. A word for primordial power in Yoruba is Imole, Imole. They predate Orisha. They're older than Orisha. They are higher than Orisha. They're not expressing human characteristics to the degree that we see with Orisha and Loa and the voodoo proper. Understand in Benin and Togo, they say voodoo, and we say voodoo in New Orleans. So the idea that many of these frightful, from the Western, from the missionaries' mindset, from the colonizers' mindset, from the enslavers' mindset, these powers were seen as scary, frightful, not just because they have sort of this negative, scary imagery attached to them, a great deal of which is new in terms of historic timing, um, but have a more authoritarian power associated with them. Those who are acknowledging the Yoruba 4-day and the West African ritual 4-day calendar are paying attention to powers and deities symbolized by things such as this today. So you know what I'm talking about. And so even those powers show up in the West in a warlike perspective, particularly when we think of what Bois Cayman is. For those of you who are new to the language, Bois Cayman was the Haitian voodoo ceremony that is said to have fueled, fed, motivated the Haitian Revolution and the sense of fearlessness that the enslaved took in acting during the Haitian Revolution. Understanding that the Bois Cayman was not one ceremony that happened one time, one day. This happens over a course of ceremonies, over a course of time. And the Bois Cayman or the Black Pig ceremony has its roots in these powers that I'm describing right now that resonate with the law, that resonate with justice, that resonate with police force, that resonate with gaining justice against thieves and liars and manipulators and grave abusers of divine law and moral law and communal law. Indeed, this is a great part of what our ancestral masquerades were about. Even how we view the Egungun of the Yoruba today is a little bit celebratory, and there's alcohol and food and great elders and leaders set out, and on cushions and in special places, while you still have that element of fear present in the behavior of the children. Watch the videos on YouTube of the Egungun festivals. Watch the behaviors of the children and the women and even some of the men as they stand around and watch Galede masquerade. And you see hints, reminders of a once great fear that existed around these powers as relates to their judicial purpose. So these ideas of curse and revenge are new and modern in that we take a really ugly, abominable circumstance, which is the Middle Passage, colonization, mystery work, and carrying people off into enslavement. But go back a little bit in time when West Africa, understand, didn't have police station, 911, you know, the fire department, all of that was handled by your community and by your responsible members of your community. Physically responsible, health had a certain amount of authority and responsibility attached to it, as well as roles and identity roles for men and women and five gendered societies where every person had a place, every person had a purpose. So the idea that the gods and the deities associated with juju, as we know it today, sometimes it's referred to as voodoo and hoodoo and conjure and root work in modern languages. But when we try and look at it from an archaeological perspective, from a historical perspective, from what can be documented and traced and looked at, we start finding a commonality in the word juju. Juju. And juju is still greatly feared even today in West Africa. It's seen as outside the realm of voodoo, understanding that voodoo is about healing, it's about nature, it's about balance, it's about childbirth and making our life transition in and out of this realm of existence. It's about crop and food production. It's about the production and the availability of water, much of which has changed in terms of priority for us here in the West, where we turn on the tap, where we plug it into the socket, things that we take for granted that are still not widely, readily consistent and available in many parts of the world where our brothers and sisters and cousins live and still exist in the nations and the lands in which we say birth these traditions, and in which we say we're giving acknowledgement to, in acknowledging Haitian voodoo and Louisiana voodoo and West African voodoo and Ifa and Akan and Sangoma practice and Hotep Wu to my Kemetic scientists and mathematicians and quantum metaphysicians out there under the sound of my voice. So these powers, these forces, these ideas that we would have clung to for any sense of justice had to be first stripped away from us. And you can't strip anger completely away. Anger is an energy. You can't strip the memory of enslavement, the memory of Middle Passage from a people, even generations later. So it then shows up as a new sort of anger, driven by the conditions, the individual conditions that we then found ourselves in, and now found ourselves in today. And so these shops and these botanicas and these spiritual stores and candle shops, to some degree, have an opportunity to greatly appropriate, bastardize, utilize symbol, imagery, information, knowledge, powers for retail first, without any regard to ethno-cultural tradition, without any regard to what's yours by way of your family, what's yours by way of your bloodline. Now, if we were talking about a book, an album, a CD, we would say that that's intellectual property, you know, but somehow the culture, the practice, the belief system, the way of life of any given people can somehow be appropriated for the dollar if it's popular enough, if it's interesting enough, if there's a global or international or national desire for access to something. And that's not always in the benefit of the people. I'm sure we thought palm oil production would be more in the benefit of the people. Palm nut production, coconut production, banana production. Much of all of this is done in the lands and the nations and in the grounds where these practices and these traditions that we identify as ATR, the umbrella of African traditional religious systems, are still to this day practiced and still under the footprint of Christianity and Islam. Forgive me, Keone, if I've been missing any of the questions, so help me out here, boo. Is abstinence necessary when starting with the Orisha? That's a great question, particularly for a modern Western audience. Understanding that there are people all over the world right now who can and are listening and enjoying this broadcast. We know it because we have a map of it in Blog Talk Radio. So we know that we have, you know, Christian beliefs of sex, sexuality, sexual identity, the relationship between husband and wife, marriages, the roles of parents. And we know that even at its most, I don't want to say basic, but at its most primal level, is often at conflict with Western culture, Western laws, Western taste to some degree. We see great movements and arguments and protests over issues and ideas that are often fueled in the East by people who live in the West. See evangelical Christians going to Congo and Uganda and Rwanda and places where there is and has been and continue to be great war and tragedy and calamity, and interject Christian values into those environments. So the ideas that we often have around sex, particularly in this audience, are forced through a Western cipher. And even our Nigerian family and our Ghanaian family and our Senegalese family and et cetera are now too having many of their moral compass forced through a Western cipher. We don't readily admit that. In fact, we have Black nationalists and Pan-Africanists and African representatives globally who suggest that some of the ideas that are being fostered are liberal Western ideas that never existed in Africa, that never had a standing in Africa, which we know because of the archaeological footprint within itself is propaganda and not true. So the idea of purification, sanctification, cleansing, being in an appropriate place to interact with spirit transcends religion as we know it, as we view it, as we understand it, as we identify it, even in a modern context. So I would say whether you are seeking to get a greater connection with Orisha, Loa, the spirit realm, yourself, meditation, eliminating the things that feed the carnal body has been demonstrated all over the world as having spiritual, profoundly spiritual effects. It's often reduced down into words like wilderness, like fasting, like abstinence, a word that you used, isolating, meditating, out on the mountaintop. It's presented in words, it's presented in imagery, it's presented in stories that are passed down generationally throughout the world. The idea of removing ourselves from things that feed the animal nature and the earth-based, carnal-based nature, give us an opening to the realm of spirit. Now, Keona, you know me, so I'm not going to give you a break, beloved. Word usage is important with me in this chat and in how I respond. It's a part of my Asperger's. It's a part of my wiring. You use the word Orisha. Now, the protocols of building connection, building relationship to Orisha are profoundly specific and unique to Yoruba land, to Oyo, to Oshogbo, to Ogu, to the towns and the people and the bloodlines and the lineages of Nigeria that are still actively operating in the initiatory processes around these deities even today. So just the notion of us here in the West fasting, abstaining, uh, changing our lifestyle doesn't negate the traditional initiatory processes and herbs and other rituals that I'm not going to reveal here on air that go into connecting with Orisha. Um, Something that I mentioned earlier today and talked about on the previous edition of the show was the idea of our heads being paramount to moving into operation with any of these traditions and these practices. And if our heads are closed, and I'm speaking on many levels now, symbolically, uh, euphemistically, if our heads are closed, have not been opened, have not been properly prepared, much as we make the heads for these powers, these deities, um, then we just don't have access to them. So we, again, in using ideas of abstinence, ideas of fasting, ideas of other Western-based and even Asian-based notions of spirit practice to then access these West African traditions, it's still an act of amalgamation. Understand it's still an act of our attempting to synchronize or at the minimum make sense of something that is indeed more traditional, more indigenous to what we can originally understand coming from a Western mindset. I use the phraseology being renewed, being reborn on the previous show, and not again from a Christian perspective, but the idea that we have to change how we view the world in order to even begin to understand these indigenous ways of life. Even second and third and fourth world ways of living life, even in a modern context. Many of us have never been outside of the UK, have never been outside of the United States, have never been outside of Canada, have never been outside of, China, Japan, or your specific location where you might be listening or viewing this program from. And so even that notion, some people in the city have a limited understanding of what rural life really is and what rural life really takes. To use an American term or a Western term, rural life might be a comparison to trying to make sense of applying a spiritual, religious, ethno-cultural practice of old and bringing it now into a modern 2020 context. We have to be renewed on many levels to even understand, to even begin to apply some of the understanding. So it's often why I say, why many of us say you can't just get it in a book. You just can't. You have to have active hands-on participation in the process in order to have it become understanding as opposed to just understanding. Greetings to everyone. Imani Sankofa, Vanessa, the Urban Tarot Goddess, Rising Star, anyone that I have not acknowledged. Greetings, salutations to both my Blog Talk Radio audience as well as my YouTube live audience. If there are any technical difficulties on either platform, please feel free to type that me that there might be an issue and give me an opportunity to clear that up. For my caller, I see you're still with me, so I'm going to assume that there is not a problem on the phone line. In fact, I'm going to unmute your mic just to give you an opportunity to let me know if things are clear for you on the Blog Talk Radio phone line.
Hi. No, yes, I just stayed on to listen. Not a problem. It does still go in and out, get very choppy, but past couple of minutes it's been clear.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate that. That feedback is really necessary in order to produce a show like this where you don't have a staff like CNN or NBC to sort of make sure everything is operating. I think also what I'm going to do differently on this broadcast is instead of using my browser and the phone system that is built into Blog Talk Radio, I'm probably going to use Skype or my cell phone in the next broadcast and just dial in separately. And that may also prevent any buffering issues carrying over into Blog Talk Radio. I may even also open the two platforms in two separate browsers. So I may use one browser for one show and another browser for another show. And that may also eliminate and limit any buffering that might not be specific to my computer or my internet connection from then affecting both platforms. I appreciate you, Kiona, and greatly need you and your participation in helping me to see what's going on in the chat and not miss any of my questions and comments and greetings as it relates to my live chat in the YouTube platform. Now, Ori is a deity unto itself. It, unlike many of the other Orisha, doesn't have paths, doesn't have individualized detailing outside of the actual ceremony of receiving your Ori, having had that done. And as with everything in Voodoo, there's a fa divination that goes with that. And so there are details within the Odus embedded in that knowledge, in the do's embedded in that help us to clarify our relationship to Ori, what that is and how that works. There's a shrine that is marketed. Again, it's more of a modern notion than maybe how things were done some time ago. There's it almost looks like a little house. It's called Ile Ori. It's a little house. It's completely covered in cowrie shells, in which your mysteries of Ori are contained within that. In other traditions, Lukomi, Santeria, sometimes Hoodoo practitioners, it's encased in an osun, which is a particular type of spiritual device that can be purchased at the Botanica, but then just like your empty issue shell, um, it has to be packed. Then certain things and certain applications have to be applied to it in order for it to work and for it to be activated. So there are some details to Ori that aren't a part of the common hoodoo or Orisha romantic discussion that aren't readily findable or accessible um, through our general Google searches. And so I appreciate particularly questions of that nature, which give me an opportunity to respond to a larger listening audience about questions that they may too have had and are not directly asking. Um, there's not a direct relationship other than the reasoning behind them share a similarity. Um, the word you're using actually describes a part of the spirit body as opposed to an actual ceremony or ritual. Um, and that goes back to Kemet, ancient Egypt, of course, Voodoo, Fa, Ifa, and many other traditions within the ATR umbrella. The idea, again, that a cleansing happens, that a head opening happens, that some level of manipulation has to happen at the head level, at the conscious level, to not just move us from one place in our understanding to another, but to then activate powers and forces within our heads, within our consciousness, within our body that otherwise are not being utilized. I remember back when I was a kid, there was a common saying that or a common belief that we only used 10% of our brain. I believe that has scientifically been disproven, but I don't believe science is still clear about to what degree um, our brain is in operation, and to how, at many levels that process works. We can say it's the most complicated computer that we all own and have access to, but it's the least understood in many cases. So the spirits that operate in many religious practices and spiritual practices around the world have also included teachings, practices, rituals that somehow involve the manipulation of the head to allow for the opening of the third eye, for instance, the opening of the mouth in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which allows you the ability to create and recreate your reality in the next world, in the underworld. So there's a connection, but there's not a direct relationship between Ori and what Metet is, and how that's referenced and utilized in Haitian voodoo. Please, if you have your questions or comments or requests, do type them in both platforms, both Blog Talk Radio and YouTube Live by way of chat in all capital letters so that I can see them and distinguish them from the other conversation in the chat. If you are with me on my Blog Talk Radio phone line at area code 845-277-9143, please do press the number 1 on your telephone keypad. I will unmute your mic and then bring you into the conversation. I mentioned Ayelala earlier as a person known to be a gentle woman, an easygoing woman, understandably loving, kind, and an incident happened in which he was unjustly accused of evildoing. She was neither tried nor convicted. Her voice was not heard. Her position was not heard because she was a slave. And this is, again, a primordial deity, one of the older egunguns, if you will, ancestral powers known in West Africa and among many ethnic groups in West Africa, and has been resurrected, much like voodoo is maligned and resurrected in the media and in publications in the West, for entertainment or for, larger numbers, uh, but also to continue to bastardize and malign, and bring negative repercussions upon practitioners of indigenous world belief systems and those who don't surrender to Islam, Christianity, Judaism, the mainstream modern, dominating, prevailing religious systems. And so it was said that she was buried alive and then later found to have been innocent of that which was, um, put on her. And so to prevent her wrath, to prevent her negative response to it from the ancestral realm, she was then deified and made a goddess and made an orisha and made a juju power that is still used to this day in protection, in defense, in retribution against liars and thieves and all sorts of lawbreakers that appear to go unjudged by societal laws or the systems and governments as they are set up in the world today. These powers, through witchcraft, synchronizing with witchcraft, amalgamation with other traditions here in the West, as well as the righteous indignation and anger, of the enslaved people, today show up as vengeful, retributive practices, that we now peg as pagan, that we now peg as folk culture, or somehow something that we are all able to access, irregardless of knowledge or skill or understanding, to sort of do the petty whims, of human nature. Um, Love and money and power and control. And so my job has always been, since my first broadcast, to separate sort of the illusions of creativity and imagination and fiction writers and horror films, and of course outright appropriation, to really demonstrating what is truthful about our practice, what is still useful and result oriented about these practices, and how we then can acknowledge them and have, a connection to these forces and these powers, today. I certainly do appreciate each and every one of you for being present and for participating in this live broadcast of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes, both in my blog talk radio platform at blogtalkradio.com/the hyphen divine hyphen prince, and also in my YouTube live platform at slash the I'm sorry, /VOODOOTYE. For some reason, I'm having a problem now with my chat box in Blog Talk Radio. So forgive me for dumping anybody who was sitting in the chat. And I am going to move forward. I have a lot on my plate for really from now present, and appreciate Kiona for all that she does to assist me, and show and moving things forward in a smoother way than if I were trying to do, all of these things on my own. And of course, I'm grateful and appreciative for all of my listening and viewing audience, live as well as in archive. And I look forward to sitting here with you again on Monday at high noon U.S. Central Standard Time for another episode of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes here on Blog Talk Radio and YouTube Live. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Ashe. Thank you, Blog Talk Radio. Thank you, YouTube Live. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Peace and blessings. Thank you.
Gonna put on my green suit, boil it down, hot and steady.